if you're not listening, the conversation really becomes very stagnant and becomes almost like a paint by numbers. Like, so when I consult folks, Sean, I'll say, have questions prepared in advance, but don't number them, because our brains have a mathematical nature to it where we'll be like, oh, okay, I've got question one, that person's going to answer it, I'm going to ask question two. But like most conversations, there is no script. And so question number one could be, question number five could actually be the better question two after that first question is answered. So I think that's why the listening piece is important, because if you're not listening, you are missing an opportunity to engage in a topic that you had already planned on talking about. But since you were so steadfast on asking question number two, you're like, oh no. Now all of a sudden, like later on in the conversation, like, oh wait, question five would have been a good idea earlier if I was paying attention. So a tip to anyone who's doing a podcast or actually doing any kind of like interview process, whether it's a job interview or something, don't number things. It's a bad thing. Use bullet points if that's the case. And one of the adages we used in radio was, if you prepare 10 questions for an interview and you only use 2, that means it was a good conversation.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Sean Trace Show. I'm your host, Sean Trace, and I've got an awesome guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Hey, Sean, I'm Joe Pardavila. I'm currently a podcaster and content creator based in Charleston, South Carolina. But before that, I spent 24 years working on morning radio in New York City. And now I'm using all that experience I accumulated over a couple decades working in the biggest market in the world to help people become better communicators and better human beings.
That's awesome. I mean, it's interesting to speak to someone who's been in it because, you've spent so much time behind a mic. It's like second nature for you now with all of the, the radio and then podcasting. When did you first realize that connection, not content, is what really keeps people listening?
Well, I think it's almost like you're instead of like thriving, you're surviving. And working in radio New York City, which is a very, as you can imagine, competitive market. And the fact that with radio, it's so easy to change a channel. Like if you're bored by a song or content that you're listening to, it's easy to flip that dial. So I realized at an early age, I had some great mentors. I mean, the two of the hosts that I work with when I first started out, one's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The other was a experienced broadcaster who worked for the WWE. So just learning from them and knowing the importance of like not wasting time was incredibly important, which actually kind of was a tricky transition to podcasting. Because as you know, podcasting, there's a lot more room to breathe. You can take your time with stories. Like I just remember being on the radio early on and like we would have like 6 to 7 minute talk breaks. And like if someone was taking too long, you could actually feel the oxygen of the room being sucked out. Like with the number of sighs and eye rolls that are like slot machines going in the back of the heads of the people you're in the room with. I knew early on that like if I wanted to connect, come up with a story that's going to connect with people, be snappy, get to the point, and tell your story in a succinct fashion. That was I learned that very early on, and not from like the listener point of view or whoever's consuming this point of view. It's from like the people in the room where you're like, okay, you cannot mess around with these people. If you have a story, get to it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I had the most hardcore. What helped me train me was I had the most hardcore audience you could imagine. They were brutal. They would eat you up, and they were judgmental as hell. It was a group of 10-year-olds. I taught kids for a long time.
Yeah.
And like, I was in my class, and like, if you don't get around to the point, kids will be like, dude, what are you trying to tell me, teacher? Like, get it out, And it helped me level up my game because for years I would just like kind of beat around the bush, But I wanted to ask you this because you're talking about, being in New York's biggest radio morning shows. Like, what did that environment teach you about grabbing attention without losing that authenticity, though?
Yeah, I mean, that was probably the toughest thing. And I think that just took time because anyone can like get to the point, but have nothing to say. You know what I mean? It's like, you can have all the presentation in the world, but like, if you have nothing to say, it's the great thing I had is I had an amazing sounding board of people that like gave no shits. Like they were just like, if things did not go well, they would tell you. And I think that's important to have that in your life. And for mine, it was pretty brutal. Like I think that environment probably doesn't fly in 2026. But I think it really helped me to know that like I had people in the room who weren't going to like blow smoke. Like they were going to say that went well if it didn't go well. And I think for a lot of people, like, your experience working with kids, like they're not going to BS you. Like they're not going to tell you if hey, Mr. Trace, that was a good class. Like,
You
yeah,
tried.
yeah, nice try, nice college try. So I think that was important for me to like have people like that who were, now it's called radical candor in like corporate circles. Like I had that in spades growing up, and I think that was what was important to me. Like I was not going to get a free pass, and I think we all want to give each other grace or give ourselves grace, but like sometimes you really do need those people to tell you, nope, it's not working.
My nephew, I love my nephews and my daughter. We all train Muay Thai together. And it's something that I told my wife and her sister. I was like, I'll pay for these kids to all study together because it's good for them and it's going to teach them some good things about life. And my nephews have been going there and they like the class. They like being able to go there and play around, but they're playing too much and they're goofing off a bit much. And they don't realize that like what they're doing has repercussions. And so finally, one day they were going to spar and the teacher's like, all right, we're going to pair kids up. And there's this one kid who came into the class and I just looked at him walk in and I was like, what's going on with that kid? Like he walked in and he had this gait to him and his mom was in a tank top with like a dragon tattoo on her back and like Muay Thai shorts. And I was like, all right, something's up here. This family just doesn't mess around, right? And so they walked up and they're like, can we spar too? My poor nephew was the kid who got matched up against this
Oh boy.
kid. Kid was like just technical. I think mom had been teaching him since he was like 2 or 3. And so
Okay.
he was just like dubbing like whack, 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 like tagging my nephew in the face and my nephew's head's popping back. I'm like, dear God, man. And like, but I think what actually happened after the class is it was actually good for him because he had been taking this for granted. He's like, oh, it's just fun. I'm just goofing off. But like after that class, he came back in the next day. He's like, yeah, Uncle Sean, I need to take this more seriously. I was like, those are wise words, kid. You got your
Uh,
butt handed to you last week, But
that's
it
right.
was
And
like
it turns out that other kid was 30 years old, which is
yeah,
probably not, probably wasn't
right?
fair for your nephew, but
Something like that, man. It was wild though. But you went from writing radio to writing a book to like
Mhm.
directing podcasts at Forbes.
Yeah.
How has your definition of good communication evolved across all of those chapters?
Well, what's funny is I remember when I jumped from terrestrial radio. So I was working in this radio station for many years. It got sold to a Christian broadcaster. So they eliminated the radio station. They flipped it out. They now play Christian music. So I often joke that I was fired by Jesus. And then when I made this transition to produce podcasts for entrepreneurs, I did have a bit of what is called, I didn't know at the time, imposter syndrome. I'm like, what am I going to say to like someone who's got an MBA or someone who's run a company or someone who's founded a company? What
Yeah.
what can I possibly do? But I immediately realized that like it's all the same shit. Like it's
Yeah.
all the same. It's people with stories to tell. And as a host, when you're doing a podcast, when you're doing a radio show, TV show, like your job is to be the story Sherpa. Your job is to get that person along because maybe they're not professional broadcasters. They don't know how to tell a story in a succinct fashion, how to get to the point quickly. So that's what a host does. And I was able to take a lot of those skills working on radio, transferring them to podcasts. And that's when I realized that not only these skills applicable to podcasting, but they're applicable to real life. And a lot of the
Yeah.
times when I feel like the best coaching is when you story. And so whenever I would like, consult one of my clients, help them along, I would often use a story from my years in radio. And so I thought, hey, this could be a book. Like me telling these stories was the way I was coaching these people up. But in
Yeah.
a way, I was like, oh, well, I'm never going to be able to coach up thousands and thousands of people. So what if I put this all in book form? And luckily at the time I was, and I still am working for a publishing company. And I did the old, stand up thing when stand-ups talk to each other, they'll be like, is this a thing? Is this a thing? And then, and I said to my publishers, like, is this a thing? Like, could this be a book? And they're like, yeah, that's a thing. And then, so it was actually a really quick write because I was using all these stories on a daily basis, sharing things that I had learned from actual experiences in radio that could help people today. And that's sort of how the book happened because I made this transition not knowing, and I'm a big proponent of self-awareness and being self-aware. And I don't think I was as good as at the time. But I wasn't self-aware that like, oh, like all these skills that I was accumulating, they're good for everybody, not just for
Yeah.
people on the radio. I just assumed like, oh, I'm just good at being on a radio. Like I could do a 4-hour live show like nothing, 5 days a week, 365 days a year. But it turns out all those things that I learned and picked up working in that room with those psychopaths, I was like, oh, this could actually help a lot of people.
Right. Well, that's the type of thing that I've been starting to realize is that uh, great communication is not something that you're born with. It's like
Mm-mm.
something that you can definitely learn. But I want to ask you that. Like, if someone wants to learn to be a great communicator, what's the first skill someone should build if they want to be better at this?
Well, so I will say I don't think you're born a great communicator, but I think you are born with some traits that make you a great communicator. And number
Mm,
one is curiosity. I think
mm,
if you're not a curious person, you're probably not going to be a great communicator. Whether you can coach yourself, transform yourself into having curiosity, maybe, I don't know. But I think the reason I was able to have a pretty good career was I was always curious. And the fact that I could have a conversation with like the lead singer of Maroon 5, but also talk to someone who runs a SaaS company it's all down to the idea of curiosity. And so if you're a curious person, and that's actually like the number one thing I talk to prospective clients because, I think we are sort of seeing this downward trend of podcasting, but I caught the front end, the hockey stick with people and everyone wanted to do a podcast. And I would often ask like, why do you want to do a podcast? And I'd be like, oh, well, my friend said I'd be a good podcast host, or oh, it'd be good for my business. It'd be good to attract clients. And I'm like, those are all the wrong reasons. Like I say to people the first time I meet them, I'm like, if you're curious about hearing other people's stories, then do a podcast. If other people's stories do not interest you, do not do it. Because that's what a
mm.
podcast is all about. It's people. It's not only obviously the guest sharing story, but you sharing stories. So I think the curiosity piece is huge. If you are curious by nature, you will be a good communicator. I honestly think it's like 1+1 = 2 there. But like you said, maybe people aren't born with those genes. I think it's just like just trying harder. I mean, I
Yeah.
often talk about like the idea of like most relationships when they go south is when one or both of the people lose curiosity in the other. Like if one partner is not curious about what's going on in the other person's brain, what's going on in the person's day, what's going on in the person's feelings, that's when you start seeing relationships wane. And so I think the same goes for communicating in a podcast, communicating in real life. Like if you're not curious or care what the other person says, like
Yeah.
you could be the greatest communicator known to man, but if you don't care what the other person says, does, or feels, then you will not be a great communicator.
100%. Communication is all about taking the baton and then passing it back, taking the baton and passing it back. But you got to be paying attention. You have to be paying attention to what the person's actually saying. And if you're not, then it's a one side. And no one likes those one sided conversations. We've all had them with someone that's just like talking and they're like, yeah, okay. But, and then they come back to their point. And you're like, wow, this person didn't even hear me. And it's like, and that's kind of like leads to my next question. Most people think communication is all about talking clearly. You argue it is really about listening well as well. Like,
Yeah.
what does real listening look like in actual practice?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of leads into the book. I mean, I titled the book Good Listen because actually it was kind of funny. I remember when I came up with that title, I was like, oh, someone else has said this for me. Because, I was coming from a publishing background. I was like, so when someone says a book is good, oh, it's a good read. But I've never heard anyone use like the term good listen in any kind of official capacity. I'm sure people have said it. I'm not saying I created
Mhm.
this two-word combination, but I was like, oh, it's actually, and it's almost like a double listening. It's like a double meaning, right? Like good listen and good listen. So there's ways to say it. And the one thing I've noticed with like the curiosity piece connecting to the listening piece is if you're not listening, the conversation really becomes very stagnant and becomes
Yeah.
almost like a paint by numbers. Like, so when I consult folks, Sean, I'll say, have questions prepared in advance, but don't number them because our brains
Mhm.
have a mathematical nature to it where we'll be like, oh, okay, I've got question one. That person's going to answer it. I'm going to ask question two. But like most conversations, there is no script. And
It
so
goes off the
question
rails,
number
man. Yeah.
one could be, question number five could actually be the better question two after that first question is answered. So I think that's why the listening piece is important because if you're not listening, you are missing an opportunity to engage in a topic that you had already planned on talking about. But since you were so steadfast on asking question number two, you're like, oh no. Now all of a sudden, like later on in the conversation, like, oh wait, question five would have been a good idea earlier if I was paying attention. So a tip to anyone who's doing a podcast or actually doing any kind of like interview process, whether it's a job interview or something, don't number things. It's a bad thing. Use bullet points if that's the case. And one of the adages we
100%.
used in radio was, if you prepare 10 questions for an interview and you only use two, that means it was a good conversation.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Because,
I love that.
because it means that it was a real thing. Like it wasn't. I mean that's what I love about podcasting and having conversations just with regular people. Like in my normal day life, it drives my wife crazy that I'll start striking up conversations, ask people about their life and everything like that. Because the idea of like finding out secrets of people, finding out stories people have never shared before, that is that's my fuel. Like that gets me going. So
Yeah.
if you're not listening, you're not going to get there. And I think one of the things that, I did to help with that was improv. I took improv classes
Okay.
in New York City, which were incredibly important because the one thing about improv is, and you've probably seen this phrase before, yes and. Yes
Yep.
to what the person just said, and I'm adding this. Well, if you're not listening to what the other person said, you really can't yes and. It's almost like yes, and I'm going to do my own thing. So that was incredibly important. I tell people all the time, like if you have an improv class in your neighborhood, and in New York City, we were lousy with them. I think there were like at the time I was at the height of the improv sketch world, there were 3 theaters that have improv shows running 7 nights a week, which if you
That's
think about
awesome.
it is like crazy. I think now it's down to 1 and maybe a second one is kind of like coming back. The pandemic killed a lot of those houses. But like the idea of like having a class like that to just like it's almost like you're going into the shop and getting like getting your oil change. Like it just gives you ideas and gives you motivation to become a better listener. And I loved the fact that I was able to use a lot of those skills in my radio job, and then obviously later on in podcasting, helping clients. So yeah, improvisation, like the correct word is long form improvisation. I think the word improv gets thrown around a lot. People don't really know what it means, but long form improvisation does have a structure. It does have tools and tricks and stuff like that, but it starts with yes and listening and reacting.
I love that because one of the things that I love about improv is that you just have to be present. You are in that moment. There was this great I studied Zen Buddhism, and I was a big fan. That was one of the reasons I moved to Asia in the first place was because in graduate school or in university, I studied Eastern philosophy, and I wanted to see it in action. So I remember studying some of the koans that they would write, and there was like, "What was the Buddha?" And he's like, "Look at the three-legged donkey running down the hill." That's actually a real thing. That is an actual Buddhist text. What is the Buddha? Look at the three-legged donkey running down the hill. And I crack up because I think about it, and there was, like, someone is trying to find enlightenment, and someone's like, "Dude, look, there's a donkey. There's a three-legged donkey running down the hill right now, man." And we see it, and someone reads it, it's like, "Oh, this is a holy scripture." No, but it was, like, just someone, like, in that moment going, "What do you dude, look at this crazy stuff," and react to it, because at the end of the day, the greatest supreme enlightenment in our whole like world is to be present in this moment. And you can have great conversations if you can do that. You can look and listen. You ever like there's one dude on YouTube that I am obsessed about. He's a rapper, freestyle rapper, Harry Mack. If you haven't looked him up, go look him up. The
Okay.
dude is genius level improvisation, well, like rap, like freestyle all off the like he sits there, he has the people give him 3 words or 4 words, and then he weaves those words into his freestyle that he does. And he is a master at it. And then he's also watching. He's like, if someone pulls out their camera to film, he'll throw that into the rap. If someone's wearing something, he'll throw that into the rap. And it takes this interacting and being awake and aware that's so powerful. But I wanna say one other thing is that I was on question number 3 and you jumped to question number 13. So,
Oh, sorry
uh,
about that.
no, it's awesome. But here comes the 13. You trained in improv. What's one improv principle that would instantly make most people better communicators if they applied it to everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the idea of being present, like you mentioned, is incredibly important. But also, I think it's the idea of a partnership. That I think
Mm,
that is the one thing that most people don't think about because and a lot of people who sign up for improv fall into this trap of like A person's going to say something and I'm thinking about something funny.
Yeah.
How can I be funny here? And the one thing that improv teaches you is like the funny doesn't come from you coming up with a line. The funny comes from this natural progression of a conversation with two people. So it's that yes anding that I mentioned earlier, but the idea that like you and I are in a scene. They call themselves scene partners, right?
Mhm.
If both of you are not doing the same thing, like listening and reacting to the other person, it's a failed scene. And so
Yeah.
the idea of it being a partnership, that's why like a lot of stand-up comics are not great at improvisation. And they admittedly say it like, I can't do that. Like I want to have the jokes. I want to be funny all the time. I've got these things to say. In improv, you cannot go in with like preconceived notions of how the scene's going to play out. You may have an idea of like what your character is because there's like, like I'm sure you've heard the phrasing of like straight man and character. Like at the jump, you'll know who's straight manning and who's the character. But then at that point, you're still doing the same thing to each other, listening and reacting. And so that's the one of the things that plays out in improv, that plays out in real life. Like when there's two people involved in a scene, two people involved in a conversation, two people involved in a podcast, if both of them are not on the same page in terms of giving and taking, that's when things go awry. When things go awry in real life, things go awry in improv. So this idea of like your partner is on equal footing is incredibly important. That again, improv and real world, you and your partner, you and the other human being, you guys are equals in the world, and that's how things flourish. That's how ideas come about. That's how things get created. It's when two people are on the same page.
I'm laughing not because of what you're saying, but because like when you were saying this give and take, and I thought back to some of my toughest guests. And one of the interesting things is because there isn't this flow. I remember this one guy, nicest dude in the world, great time chatting before the interview, but the camera turned on and suddenly he shut down. And it was wild to watch it go south because I was like, "So, Bob, tell me, why did you decide to build this company?" I wanted to. I was just, okay, that's great. Do you have anything else to say there? Not really. And I'm just like, oh God, I'm falling apart. You're giving me nothing, man. But what I had to do was eventually where I went, and this is something I used for years in my classes. My classes were off the rails. We were all over the place when I was a kids teacher, man. I had controlled chaos. My first day, I would have a TA come in and she would watch a class and she's like, "Is this even okay? Are they allowed to say this stuff?" And I was like, "Are they learning?" And I was like, "My students have 100% re-enrollment rate. Like I've never lost a student. This kid here had been with me for 4 years." And because I was teaching English, I wasn't teaching um, to in public school and stuff. But like what I found was that I would use humor. Humor was like a superpower, and it allowed the lightness to come out, and we could dive into crazy difficult topics. We could go look at anything, but as long as you had humor, there was this lightness and this connectivity that would happen for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I always say people play to your strengths. And so one of the things that's important to me, like my style, like the one thing that, and again, my terrible self-awareness as a young person, like people to this day, when I'm done with a podcast, no one remembers what we said during the podcast. When I hit that off button, they'll be like, oh, I love your energy. I love your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And so that's my, if you want to call it a superpower, that's my superpower, that I'm enthusiastic about having these conversations with people. And not everyone's going to have that superpower. Maybe another person's superpower is like they're really great at research and they're going to ask amazing questions that no one else would ever ask, right? So that's superpower in itself. Being a great listener and just letting the people like tell their story, that's a superpower. So I think, and you identified yours, it was humor. So if sometimes it just takes a little introspection of like, what do I got? What's my power? It's like a superhero. Can I fly? Can I climb walls? Can I see through walls? Like, so identifying that in either in a professional setting, in a personal setting, I think that's important for people to be more self-aware of what their skills and traits are. And I think that's what helps. So like sometimes I'll bludgeon people with enthusiasm. So if I have a guest like you had who had like 1-2 word answers, by the time I'm done with them, these people are bouncing off the walls. Because one thing that I often say is like, we're all monkeys. Like we're always sort of like we're always matching each other's mannerisms. Like if you yawn, I'm going to yawn. If you move your hands a lot, I'll move my hands a lot. And so matching energies is what happens when a lot of times when I'm having a podcast with someone where maybe they're the first 5 minutes are like complete duds, but then they realize something like goes off in their brain, like, shit, I'm gonna fall off this truck if I don't hang on for dear life. I gotta pump up the energy. And again, that's my vibe. You'll have your own vibe, and I think that's important for a lot of people to recognize, like, what their superpower really is.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we like, I love that. Like, I love superhero movies for one, and I'm always thinking about, what would I would do with certain superpowers. And honestly, I might not do the right thing. I might be more of a little Robin Hood there, and so it's okay. We all have our things that we do with our superpowers, and I don't know. You know, but my point being is that there is this time period when any superhero journey where they have to start, it's not easy at first once they get the superpower to kind of embrace it. There is this time, this awkward time where they have to kind of go through this redevelopment. And I think that once people start identifying what they're good at, there still is a process of learning to use that skill. That's where things like improv and refining that can be really helpful.
And finding where that skill fits. Like
Ooh,
you talk about the superhero's journey. Like we've all seen this movie play out, or in comic books. Like the act one is they discover their power, right? So it's
yeah.
whatever power we're talking about. And two is like, oh, they're not using their power for the right way. And obviously Spider-Man has that famous line: "With great power comes great responsibility." And then act three is them acting out and using that power. So for a lot of people, like obviously we're talking in superhero terms, but like everyone's gift fits something. So, like, if you're really good at X, find where you can use X. If you're really good at Y, find what's good at what you could do with Y. And a lot of times it could be a job that's just something that you're doing for fun, but sometimes it could be a career. So I think harnessing that power, using it for your good, and obviously hopefully for the good of humanity is what is very important I think for a lot of people to find sort of like, it's a very dramatic word, but find their calling. Because a lot of times
Yeah.
people find their calling when they can use their gifts. But sometimes people have trouble identifying what that gift is, and that requires a lot of like thinking, meditating on it, just practicing, like going to an improv class. Am I good at this? Okay, cool. Maybe that's my gift. So I think using gifts are incredibly important. And I think a lot of people sometimes maybe feel like, oh, that gift's not worth it. Like, who cares that I'm really good at asking questions? Like, no, there's probably a job or career out there that could be useful to be able to ask good questions. So I think finding that gift's really, I think, a really key driver for a lot of people when it comes to happiness.
How did you find your gift and how did you develop it more?
I mean, I was your obnoxious kid that would put on shows for the family. I was obsessed with like magic shows and impressions, and so like from an early age, I was like, I want to be in show business. But my parents were immigrants. I didn't have any connections, but I knew that for whatever reason, I would somehow end up in show business. I grew up, for anyone who's familiar with American television, like idolizing David Letterman, who's this famous talk show host who hosted a midnight show and then moved up to the 11:30 show later on in his career. Legendary, like stand up slash talk show host. And it was funny because at the time, all my friends, their idols were like athletes. So it's the 80s. So like Don Mattingly and Michael Jordan. And it was like, those were their heroes. My hero was like a guy on TV just talking shit and talking to guests, right? And so that was sort of my North Star. I was like, I want to get there. Like, maybe I won't become there's only like three late night shows on network television in America. So it's like, maybe I'm not going to get there, but if I follow that path and I'm passionate about what I do, I'll do that. And so what I did was I was not a great student in high school, but I was good enough to get into like a local state school, which had a really good communications program. And at the time was this high tech TV and radio facility on campus. And I remember I walked in day one to the TV studio and I said, "Hey, I want to be on TV." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, no, we don't let freshmen on TV. You can work behind the scenes." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." So then I walked down the hall to the radio studio and I said, "Hey, I want to be on the radio." And the guy goes, "What time you want to go on?" And so I'd always loved like radio and television equally, but television was always my ultimate goal at the time because again, this was the 80s. Everyone wanted to be on TV. Um, and so I realized that like, oh, cool. So like all the stuff that I love to do can be a job. And I was like, this is
Mhm.
cool. And so I remember and I was not a very bright student, but I remember like during the second year of college, I was like, I should probably go for an internship and see like if this is what I want to do as a career. And and looking back at it now, I was like, I was very prescient because most kids, and Sean, like when it comes to internships, they'll usually wait till like their junior or senior year, which I often say is a big mistake because what happens is you'll go through 4 years of school, you'll go get an internship, and you're like, man, this career is terrible. Like, I don't want to do this for a
Mhm.
living. So luckily, I was pressured enough to do that. So I ended up interning at this radio station, and I was a scared shitless kid, Sean. I was so scared of going to New York City. I was living in the suburbs of New Jersey, but the idea of like going into Manhattan was like very foreign to me. So I picked this radio station that just happened to be located above the train station in Midtown Manhattan. So it was literally like one train from New Jersey into Manhattan, 20 minutes in and out. I wouldn't have to even like go in the subway or go in the scary streets of New York. So I go in and then get this internship. I'm there for like the course of a semester, and then at the end of it, one of the full timers in the promotion department was just about to leave. And summertime for radio stations is very important. They do a lot of promotions, a lot of thing giveaways, stuff like that. And they say, hey, listen, if you like, we think you're a great fit. We'd love you to fill in this position because we don't have time to like start a new process. Would you like to take this job? The only caveat is you'd have to leave school. And at the time, I was like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of school. And then also, like many people, I'll go back to school one day. Sure. Next thing you know, Sean, I ended up staying there at that same radio station because I was a scared little shit kid for 24 years, working my way up the chain from an intern throwing t-shirts out at crowds to being a co-host and executive producer of the morning show. And it just sort of was, I'm very fortunate of my path. I think a lot of people, especially when you're working in media, to be able to stay in one place for an extended period of time is very rare. So I appreciate that. And it was to me is like that was my college, like working with some great people that I mentioned at the top, like having that experience of being able to use all the things that I knew I was good at as a profession was like it was awesome. It was such a great time, and when it ended, it was kind of bittersweet, but also it was one of those things where I think you've been there, Sean. Where like all right, that was a good run. I think it's time to move on. And the landscape of radio was changing at the time. Like I was lucky enough to be in radio in the heyday of the 90s where like DJs were being paid millions of dollars and it was like crazy money. And so towards the end of it, radio started dying. You saw the rise of podcasts. Radio companies were being consolidated and contracted. And so I got out at a time where, like I said, Jesus pushed me in a direction to get out of radio and to go into podcasting and do these other things that I'm doing. But yeah, I think it's just like I was very fortunate to find a place where my ability and skill and passions met, and I hope that for everyone.
I love that. Well, I wanted to ask you another question too, because you made me think about for other people that are listening that sit there, go, I want to step into that, but like eh, improving their situation, their experience talking with others. What's something small that someone could do today that would help them kind of find their superpower?
Yeah, there was this cliche that really had my skin crawl in 2025, and that was getting comfortable with the uncomfortable because it was just used so much. And I think that's derived from the fact that, like, I think as a society we got really soft. The fact that we can watch any movie on the planet within seconds, we can have something delivered in a few minutes. I think we've all. I think people say it's a generational thing. I think we're all have gotten softer, and so this idea of being uncomfortable was just against that whole ethos of convenience and safety. And so I say for anyone who wants to excel at something else that, maybe they're in a rut, they don't know what to do. It's just, there is a level of discomfort that you're going to have to embrace. If it could be like
Yes.
the idea of like leaving a job that's probably comfortable but you're not happy. And so there
Yeah.
could be discomfort with like a job search or even a relationship. Like sometimes people in a relationship for too long and the idea of like breaking it off could be uncomfortable and they don't do it. So again, as much as that became a cliche last year in 25, I think it is important, you ask the question like what's one step is well, the first step is just like getting out of your comfort zone because as much as we all love our comfort zones, we're all creatures of habits, we love routines, man, sometimes it takes getting out of that comfort zone. For me, it was leaving radio and finding something new and then finding comfort in that new zone. So yeah, I mean, for anyone who's in the position that we're talking about, like trying to find their calling or anything like that, sometimes it does require a level of discomfort.
I own a media company that we do producing like short form content for people. And so we get business people, um, you know, podcasters, financial advisors that send us their content and then we edit it and send it back. And one of my big clients came back and said, "We need to improve the there's new styles out there and we want to do something completely different." And at first it's challenging because you're like, "Well, what do you mean different? Like how are we going to go?" I'm like, always say yes, but like when I sat there and started thinking about it, I was like, "Well, here's what I'm capable and my team's capable of right now. We want to get to here. This is the new standard that everyone's is doing, and like this is where we want to get to." And it was uncomfortable, but then, today, that was 2 days ago, I had this request. Today, I hired someone, and Monday, we'll be able to roll out new features. But it was like that growth, that process of sitting there going, "How can I expand? How can I grow?" It was uncomfortable. It's not easy to grow. It's not easy to do things, but, you're on the other side of your discomfort is the place that you wanna be. Like, you have to go through it. Ryan Holiday, one of my favorite writers, he's got his books. One of his books that he writes that's my favorite is The Obstacle Is the Way. And he says that, so much of where you wanna be going, there's an obstacle in the way, but really that obstacle is the thing that's gonna help you get to where you wanna be and really step into it. Jocko Willink in his, like, book, what is it? Radical Ownership. He's like, "Something bad happens, good. Like, it's gonna help you get to the other side, but you have to be able to go, this growth right here, this discomfort." And you're right, man. In Vietnam, like right now, I'm in Vietnam, you're back in the US, and we're having this conversation. And it's pretty damn clear. When I first moved to Vietnam in 2001, like there was none of this, dude. And I moved back and forth. And like when I wanted to make a phone call to my mom, I had to get a hard line, and then when I called on the hard line, I had to go into this booth. They had a number outside the booth that would tick away. And like it was $1 a minute. So I called my mom and I'm like, "Mom, I love you." And I'm just watching the money tick away. And I'm like, "Yeah, things are good. Yeah, I've been here. I'm doing this. Oh, yeah, everything." Boom. Tried to get through an entire conversation of 45 minutes in 10. And I was just like, "I got to go. It's $10 already. I'm not
You're
going to go any
preparing to be a
higher than that."
podcaster. That's what was going on
Yeah,
there.
right.
That was your pre-podcast career, like trying to get a conversation up and going. Yes. Yeah. It's so
Right.
funny you mentioned Ryan Holiday because, as both, middle-aged white guys, I think we all kind of like cling to stoicism over the last few years. It's kind of like our very
100%.
cliched existence. And so the one thing when I discovered stoicism, and to me, like when people ask, like, how do you dwindle it down? How do you describe it? And to me, it's very simple. And obviously, Ryan Holiday has done a great job, made a pretty good racket out of like 1,000-year-old philosophy and stuff. But the idea of you can control what you can control. That to me is
Yeah.
the basis of stoicism. Control what you can control. And every time when I have like an issue either at work or maybe even like just driving your car, like you control what you control. Like it drives my wife crazy because sometimes she'll say something and I'll be like, "Hun, we can control what we can control." And for people not familiar with stoicism, the idea is like you control your own actions. What other people say, do, and feel is completely up to them. They could do whatever they want. But that should not affect what your life is like. Your life is how
Right.
you want it to be. So you make decisions. So, for example, like if someone cuts you off when you're driving your car, why are you going to get mad? Because there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you could do
Yep.
about that person who cut you off. So why are you getting mad? And obviously, that's a very rudimentary example of stoicism. But that's the gist of like what other people do and say has nothing to do with what you're feeling. You feel what you want to feel. And so I think it's important. I think that's why a lot of people have kind of gravitated over the last few years. Again, been around for thousands of years. But this idea of being able to be the control of your own life is incredibly important for people. Like because I think there's so much outside noise, obviously because of social media. The fact that you can communicate so easily to people. You talked about your example of like calling home. Like, yeah, landlines were a thing where like you actually had to be home to receive a call, and then there was like this fancy jump to like voicemail and answering machines. Sure, that was the next level. But this idea that you can literally communicate with any person on the planet at any point, it's like that means like you're getting information all the time. And so the only thing you can do is either, again, control your control. shut it off. Like, no one, if you don't want anyone to call you, shut your phone off. There's no way anyone's
Yeah,
going to call you. No one's going to be able to send you a DM. No one's going to be able to send you a text. Shut off your phone. Control what you can control.
I love that. One of the things too that I think that is important there is like you're right with social media especially. We are inundated with information, and some of it's great, some of it is weird and out there, and I think that the noise gets to be a lot. And I think that one of the things that um, we have to kind of slow down as well. Speed up in some areas, but slow down in others. And when we're slowing down, it's interesting because our brains are getting trained for this speed constantly.
Yeah.
And yet with real conversations, you have to give them time. And it's like the social media challenges us to like new things, swipe, swipe, swipe. And then suddenly, but like with a conversation, it was interesting. I'm gonna give a better example. My daughter has a YouTube channel, Ilani's Little World, and it's not just hers. I set it up with her as an educational channel ages ago because I was a teacher, and when I was trying to find videos for her to watch that were appropriate, couldn't find anything. So I said, "Well, I can't find it. Let's make it." So we started making kids content and really educational. We're just going out learning about animals and doing all these things. The other day, she has a hard time filming. She gets really like stir crazy. But it was interesting because we started doing like kids podcasts. I'm finding really cool science and educators. And we had this one lady on and this guy on who had all these lizards and reptiles, and he was talking to us about animals like special defense mechanisms and how they had superpowers. She sat through a 50-minute conversation and just was captivated. She's a 10-year-old kid, but she was captivated because it was real, it was authentic, and he's pulling out animals like, "Oh, well, look at this amphibian and stuff." And it was powerful to see because she was able to slow down, and this is a 10-year-old that's just, like, all over the place, and it was beautiful to watch people to be able to go deep when you create the right situation to allow them to do so.
Yeah, and I will say, on top of our point, I don't want this to be like, all social media is bad. You made a good
Not at
example of
all.
like, so it's great, and it's so funny too because you can't escape it. I met with clients the other day, and they were 60 plus old women, and they wanted to do a podcast about like, things you could do in your 60s and so on and so forth. And they asked me like, and I'm sure you get this question all the time, how do you market the podcast? I'm like, well, do you have a social media channel? It's like, no, I deleted my LinkedIn. I'm like, well, listen, as much as we can all complain and we could think of
It's the
horrible
reality.
examples of it, it is what it is. Like, if you want to reach a large amount of people without
Yep.
spending tens of thousands of dollars buying Google ads or Facebook ads, you've got to be on social media. And the
Yep.
people that are really good at it are not just what do they call it? Post and ghost? Like they're not just posting
Yeah.
stuff and then leaving. The really good ones are posting and interacting with other people, interacting with other creators. And I think you see all the stats all the time. Like they say, if you have, like, say for example, LinkedIn, like less than 5,000 followers or connections, it's pointless to post. You're better off
Yeah.
commenting on other posts because that's how you will grow a following. And this goes for all social media. Like the more you interact with other people. So again, I don't want this to be a whole social media conversation, but like the idea of like social media bad, real life good. It's like, yeah, I mean, sure, there is some badness to social media, but like we're in this world where if you're not on it, you do not exist. And I say that to clients.
100%.
Like sometimes I'll like most of my clients are all business and they don't have a LinkedIn page. I'm like, you might as well not exist. Like you might as
Yeah,
well
right.
not exist. And I'm not saying that you have to be a content creator and posting blogs weekly and videos every day. It's like if you don't have any presence in the world that you're delving in. So if you're a content creator and you don't have a YouTube page, like what are you doing? If you're an entrepreneur and don't have a LinkedIn page, what are you doing? So
Yeah.
if you're news, if you write blog, like, if and you're not on X, what are you doing? So yes,
Yeah.
we can all talk about the negatives of all those things, but listen, we are playing cards, and those are the cards we are dealt right now.
100%. Well, it's interesting too because one of the things with social media is it's a tool. It's a tool like any other tool, and it's a tool that you can use in a number of different ways. If you want to every time I hear people complaining about anything, I sit there and try to think about, like, is it that thing or is it something else? Because, like, say with social media, you can complain about it, but you wanna make a difference in the world? Well, it's your best way to reach the whole world, you
Mhm.
know? And I think that, like anything, you have to sit there and figure out how to find your superpower and start to look at, what is it that you wanna be telling people? For me, I got this my whole motivation to start my media and content channels because of my 10-year-old daughter. And I was like, I wanna make this world a little bit more, fun of a place to be in for all of us and start also creating a digital record that I could pass on to her someday, and so "Hey, your dad's not a complete jackass,
Ah, it's
Look,
good.
here
Yeah,
this is,"
and social media is what you make of it. I mean, as much as we talk about the nefarious algorithm, like when I hear people talk about like, oh man, X is like putrid. What's the line from Star Wars? The cantina line,
The
like the
vile
most
yeah, yeah, yeah.
vile. Yeah, it's like yes, if that's where you want to live. Like my ex, Sean, is like baseball news and like but like I own a dachshund, so it's like dogs. So like social media is what you created. Like if you are on TikTok and you're just watching dog videos, you know what TikTok's going to serve you? More dog videos.
Yeah,
So this idea that you don't have control of what your social media feed is bullshit. Like if you really want to connect with people in a particular vertical, just play in that space. You're not going to get Donald Trump news if you're watching, cats. Like that's just not how the algorithm works. You know what I mean? So this you do have control and say in what you see, do, and watch on your social media channel. So that's one of the things where people like when they do the flippant thing, like, oh, all social media is terrible. I'm like, what are you doing? Like if
like,
all
what are you
social
looking
media
at?
is terrible, there's a reason. Because the algorithm is there to make money, and it's not going to make money if it's showing you stuff that you don't want to watch.
I got one last question too. If you could go back in time and give some advice to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
So yeah, I think about this a lot, and I think one of the things that I definitely want to say is, and it's just going to sound weird, but like two words: do more. Because I remember when
I
I
love
got
that.
into radio, like it was all encompassing. Like I was working morning radio, so that meant I was waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning for a 6 a.m. show, doing the show, stay in the office till like noon to 1, go home, crash, take a nap, watch some TV at night, and then go to bed. And because of that cycle and because of the sort of all-encompassing nature of my career was like, I didn't really do anything else. Like I didn't, I mean, I didn't take an improv class until I was like in my late 30s, and
Mm,
that would, if I could go back, I would tell my younger self like, don't just be about your career. And this could be for anybody too. It's like you don't want to, and not that I regret it because I love my time. Like to me, it was my drug. Like because my job was essentially like watching what was happening in the world, synthesizing it, and putting in a 4 hour show. So obviously, to do that, I can't keep my eyes open all day long. Whether that was watching TV, being on social media, sharing stories of things that happened in my life. So it definitely it was valuable to me, and I loved doing it. But I wish that I had carved out more personal time for me to do other things. And so, like later in life, still while working in radio, I was like, I gotta do, for years I'd always talked about taking improv class and doing sketch comedy. And finally I did. And it's always funny because I was always like the oldest guy in the group because most of the people that are in that world are like in their 20s. And I was like here in my late 30s, early 40s doing this stuff. And it was amazing. And then another thing too was like, I was always a film buff and I was like, oh man, one day I want to make a film, not until my 40s that I actually like sit down, write a movie with a partner, and create a short film that we put in film festivals. So if I could go back, I would say do more. Don't just do what you're doing, do more. And I think that's great advice for a lot of people too, because it's like, hey, listen, we all have bills to pay, we all have families to feed, but we can do more. There's this great line I remember Jerry Seinfeld saying. He was like one of those TMZ reporters, and the guy was just like, "Man, Jerry, you've got this TV show, you're doing comedy specials, you're making movies, blah blah blah. How do you make time to do it?" And as you all know, Jerry Seinfeld, he's very sardonic and very flippant. He goes, "I got the same amount of time you do. I sleep my 8 to 10 hours like you do. Then I got like the other 10, 12 hours of the day to do what I got to do. And so I don't make time. I have the time. We all do. And so use that time wisely. No one has 26 hours in a day, 27 hours a day. Nope. All got the same amount of time. It's what we do with it.
I love that. Where can people find out more about you and to watch your podcast?
Oh, well, I'm very easily Googleable because luckily I think there's only one Joe Pardavila out there. So if you Google Joe Pardavila, you'll probably get my website, joepardavila.com. My YouTube page is Joe Pardavila. All my social medias are Joe Pardavila. TikTok, I'm J Pardavila. But yeah, just Google me. I'll pop up there somewhere. The benefits of having a kind of peculiar name. So yeah, just Google Joe Pardavila and you'll find me anywhere.